live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel. The People's National Movement 2015 Manifesto launch.
Morning. First of all, let me say thank you to everyone for coming. I know some of you would have had to brave the inclement weather, but such is life, and it is the rainy season, so thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Nisa Pei, and I'm happy and thrilled to welcome you to the official launch of the 2015 Manifesto of the People's National Movement. I think that deserves a hearty round of applause. By definition, a manifesto is a public declaration of intentions, opinions, motives, and today the PNM stands ready to do just that and to share that with you. Now, this is possibly the most talked about document in the last year and certainly of the last few weeks. So I invite you all now to sit back, relax, take heed, most importantly, make notes as the PNM unveils their plans for Trinidad and Tobago.
The People's National Movement held their policy deliberations on the way forward at the Hyatt Regency on Sunday, October 26th. This marked the prelude of activities for the PNM's 45th annual convention. In focus was a keen deliberation and discussion on the PNM's new strategic plan for Trinidad and Tobago for 2030 and beyond.
We decided to prepare a new strategic plan for the country. A revision of Vision 2020, as it were, amply branded by our political leader as Vision 2030. Ladies and gentlemen, delegates, discussions and deliberations and hopefully adoption of this document is the prime purpose of this convention.
For today would be known as the day when the PNM sat down as a political organization to do a comprehensive review of that work we had done before, Vision 2020, in the context of its new label, Vision 2030, the road ahead. For unlike others, when we come into office, we don't look back, we look ahead and continue to build on the foundation.
Discussed at this plenary session were initiatives on major policy areas that impact on the quality of life and took into consideration changes in the internal and external environment and areas of policy shift by the new leadership. These initiatives delved into the theory and mechanics of what makes good governance and explored the idea of choice but in a more liberal way while maintaining the PNM's founding principle of integrity in public life. Success in building a nation could only come with careful planning and hard work. What can only be described as a unique and groundbreaking undertaking saw delegates from various constituencies being given the opportunity to get involved in all areas of policy formation that would lead to the growth and development of Trinidad and Tobago. Macroeconomic policy for sustainable growth and diversification, agriculture, healthcare, energy sector policies, education policies, infrastructure, international relations and regional development, self-government for Tobago, self-employment and enterprise development policies, local government and rural development, national security, youth and sports development, and social policies, culture, arts and the media.
at the convention on Sunday, I will be doing a summary of what we were told by the delegates and a summary of our policy as it is now emerging. But a detailed policy will flow from that as we go along. We're going to invite public comment, and we will have a very detailed policy, I would say, within the next month or two, which will be the PNM policy going into the next general election. No other political party has engaged its membership and has done this kind of work in terms of developing a policy to take Trinidad and Tobago forward.
Solving problems require a series of calculated steps. Here, each policy area was assigned to a committee led by a specific facilitator. The various initiatives and implementation strategies were assessed and analyzed for presentation to the National Convention and outlining appropriate recommendations aimed at taking the country another step further towards total prosperity for our people. The goal is progress, and it is here that together we map a way forward. The first step is identifying issues as they exist and revealing them in conversation. At the committee stage, plans are formulated with the aim of overcoming challenges and critiqued in an effort to arrive at the best policy strategy which ensures that goods and services are delivered to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and that they get value for their money. This nearly half-a-century tradition of the People's National Movement not only keeps the party working in organized unison, but also ensures consistency on meeting various milestones. Here at the Hyatt, new ideas were informed by public opinion, new faces led the action committees, and ushered in a new era in party politics. The People's National Movement, under the leadership of Dr. Keith Rowley, has begun a journey to rebuild Trinidad and Tobago. It is now our responsibility as citizens of this country to take up the mantle as a force to enact positive change as we move forward. The People's National Movement, building a nation together.
I now invite, the political leader of the People's National Movement, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, to continue the almost 50-year tradition of engagement and join us on stage to officially welcome you to this morning's marquee event. Dr. Rowley.
I hope so. I think so. Thank you very much, party chairman, party officers, candidates, members of the media, and I gather we have a guest or two somewhere. After that introduction, I don't think that my presence on stage is really necessary, because what was in that introduction is exactly what I was planning to say. However, since I have been invited onto the podium and I have to say welcome, I must, as a good host, say welcome to all of you this morning for what in effect is a confirmation of the work that we have been doing, I would say, for the last 5 years. I just want to say that a manifesto is really a work program against a background of all things being equal, something which I think as the economists usually make that reference to cover. For example, in this situation, when one looks at the manifesto of the PNM, it says, if we have all the resources that are required and available to us, these are the things that we will do. And against that thought is, we have looked at the needs, the requirements, the wants of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we've identified where these are. We've looked at the things that are impeding our progress. We identify them as problems, and we're saying, if we are managing the country's affairs, these are the things that we will do. But one has to see that against the background of the availability of resources to do those things. Some things require the same resources we have now, just a different attitude in treating with it. Some things require serious investments, large outlays of capital and so on, and that would be viewed against the background of our revenue stream as a country. We started this exercise way back in 2020 when I think oil was $120 a barrel or something like that, or maybe not quite that much, but we did have significant revenues in the period coming up to 2009. And a lot of the problems that we identified then, some have been solved, some have been worked on, but there are many things still to be done. And as we look at those things that to be done and the way we want to take the country forward, we look now at our revenue stream and we see that I think today oil is posted at what, $41 a barrel or something like that. So the revenue side of the country is considerably different to when we started out on this exercise to do a number of the things we wanted to do. It does not mean then that we don't identify the things that we want to do as things that we should want to do. What it does is challenge us to find a way to do it, even as the economic horizon looks a little more blurry. In some instances, we might have been able to fund these things straight up from our revenues. Now, the same things, we might have to fund them by loan arrangements, but those loan arrangements might be available to us. In other areas, we might have to scroll back onto how much we wanted to do and over what time frame. But at the end of the day, what the manifesto represents is our expectation for the country if things go well for us in terms of our ability to execute what we think the country should have. So I want to thank all the people in the party and outside of the party who have contributed to the summary position that we're at now. The document that you will see and receive a copy of today is really the summary. And another thing I want to say is that I'm sure that there'll be lots of comments that, well, the manifesto didn't include this and the manifesto didn't include that. It is virtually impossible to put everything in a manifesto. If we try to do that, the final manifesto might be about 200 pounds, and then you will still say, now we haven't put into the manifesto a policy for changing the weight of the manifesto. So it really is a summary of, I would say, the vast majority of things, major areas that we would want to focus on. And somewhere in there, we would like to believe that the broad spectrum of governmental activity would be covered. We also want to say that the government and the governance of the country is not a substitute for the individual responsibility. And therefore, you will see a lot of things absent from the manifesto which would remain with the individual citizens. But there are a lot of things in the manifesto that create the environment for the individual citizen to prosper, to participate, and to grow. So, having said that, I don't want to delay you much more this morning. I myself am eager to hear Mr. Imbert, I think for the last time, go through his exercise. I think he's done this 3 or 4 times before, because we in the PNM, we are an organization that we very, how should I put it, carefully. We have very specific ways of doing things, and a lot of those ways are specified by the organizational structure, which go back to the Constitution. So Mr. Imbert, for the last 3 years, have had to nurse this process and from time to time make presentations to various arms of the party, and you just saw a while ago the convention that we had here, and subsequently the General Council, and I think last week, the last one he made was to a special convention of delegates at City Hall last Saturday. So I'm going to relieve him this morning after he has finished this, and everybody will have a copy, and the candidates will then go off with their copies at the end of this preparation process. So finally, the manifesto is here. I know some of our friends on the other side have been waiting for it very eagerly, been talking about it. I hope we hear no more about no policy, because the document is all about policy and PNM's intentions. So let's get straight to it, and I invite Mr. Imbert to take over.
Ladies and gentlemen, ahead of our next speaker, I just politely ask you to turn all cell phones and other noisemakers into the vibrate mode. And I'm happy to invite the Vice Chairman of the PNM and candidate for Digmartin Northeast, Mr. Colm Ilmbert, to come inside and join us on stage to present the Manifesto of the People's National Movement.
Thank you very much. I don't always come inside, usually come outside. Political leader of the People's National Movement, Dr. Keith Rowley, and our next Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Party chairman and other members of the leadership, our deputy political leaders, officers of the movement, our 41 outstanding candidates, members of the media, and those few very special guests that we have this morning. I somehow don't believe this will be the last time I'll be addressing this matter. I've done it so many times before. I suspect I'll be called upon to do it again before the election, but that's okay. I enjoy doing this. As you will have seen from the introduction, we spent a long time on this manifesto document, this submission, this offering to the nation. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the hundreds of people who have made submissions and have been part of this manifesto presentation. We were getting submissions up to yesterday. I went to Balizi House to give Dr. Rowley his advanced copy of the manifesto, being the only one in existence at that point in time. I didn't even have one. I gave it to him. And as I was there, I received submissions on important aspects of national life. And as he was there, he got one from a group, making proposals. I think it was on the credit union movement. And we are going to continue to accept any recommendation, any proposal made to us. But let's go straight into the manifesto. Now, the first section of the manifesto, when you look into it, is an examination of the behavior of the UNC-led government over the last 5 years and their performance, because we thought it was essential to focus the population's attention on their track record, because they're trying to avoid that. So when you look at the first couple pages of the manifesto, we have examined their track record on crime, we have examined their track record on the economy, their track record on flooding, on traffic management, and so on. And we have put the bare facts to the population so they can see, for example, that whereas the government is promising zero tolerance on crime, they have, in fact, presided over a murder rate of in excess of 400 murders per year, with no abatement of that this year in 2015. And also, for the first time, an armed jailbreak with guns being smuggled into the prison. So you will see we have put some bullet points in the manifesto on their track record on crime. When you look at the track record on flooding, for example, let me jump to flooding. With just a few minutes of rain, South Key floods, which demonstrates that there's been no attention to some of the more serious flooding issues that we have in this country. If you examine traffic, for example, we have now over 700,000 vehicles on the road in Trinidad and Tobago. And you spend hours stuck in gridlock in bumper-to-bumper traffic. So in terms of their solution to our traffic problem, they have done nothing over the last 5 years except exacerbate the flooding problem. If you look at their performance on the economy, for example, all we've had for the last 5 years is economic stagnation. We've had no meaningful growth. You look at the public debt. The public debt has increased from $65 billion when the PNM demitted office in 2010 to $110 billion now. There's been a 70% increase in the public debt. You look at food prices. Food prices have increased by 92% since May 2010. So the cost of living for your ordinary person has almost doubled. So we thought it was necessary, and you'll see in the beginning of the manifesto, to ground the reader in the reality that has been the disaster, the catastrophe that has been this UNC-led government, which calls itself a partnership. But let's go straight into the actual policies and programs of the People's National Movement. Now, we thought, and there's been no focus on this from other political parties, we thought that one of the biggest problems in Trinidad and Tobago today is a lack of confidence in politicians and the political system generally. And that is because of the conduct of the members of the other side over the last 5 years. So one of the first things we're going to do, we're going to focus on morality and integrity in public life. And in order to do this, we're going to introduce a code of ethical conduct for parliamentarians. We're going to amend the standing orders, and we're going to have several principles using a document produced by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association dealing with accountability, transparency, conflict of interest, and behavior generally of parliamentarians. And we're going to make this code of conduct part of our parliamentary system, and there will be severe penalties for non-compliance, so that when you have a situation where a parliamentarian is accused of abuse, accused of witness tampering, accused of attempting to pervert the course of justice, accused of bribery, and so on, the code of conduct will kick in right away, and action will be taken against parliamentarians. We thought we needed to ground our policies in integrity in public life. We're also going to strengthen our anti-corruption laws, specifically strengthen the powers of the Integrity Commission. And we're going to introduce an offense of unjust enrichment. Because there's so many stories, and we think it's about time that people found out what the facts were. But there's so many stories of people coming into public life in 2010 with not much to show in terms of assets, and now rumors abound of these same individuals becoming multimillionaires, owning many properties, driving very expensive motor cars, and living a very lavish lifestyle, when prior to 2010, they didn't have, using the vernacular, they didn't have 2 shillings to rub together. So we thought we need to refocus and repurpose the Integrity Commission on the concept of unjust enrichment. So if a person in public life has assets beyond their means, or has a standard of living that is disproportionate to their past or present income, they will have to explain this or face the consequences, which would be prosecution. We also are going to deal immediately with this whole question of public procurement. The UNC have spent the last 5 years talking about public procurement, but as I stand on this podium today, the Public Procurement Act, the legislation, is not in effect. There's no new procurement system in Trinidad and Tobago. The Central Tenders Board ordinance is still there, and the lax and loose controls in the state enterprises are still there. So an urgent priority for the People's National Movement is to deal with the weaknesses, because there are some weaknesses. Despite taking 5 years, the UNC ended up with a piece of legislation that has some weaknesses in it. We're going to correct those weaknesses in consultation with all of the stakeholders who have an interest in procurement, and we're going to move immediately to implement the Public Procurement Act. But we're going to sit down, this will be a feature of the next 5 years. The PNM will sit down with all stakeholders, consult with them, and determine a way forward for the implementation of the Procurement Act. In terms of campaign finance, we've all heard about political investors. I first heard that term in 1995. We had the 3 famous political investors, Ish, Steve, and Brian. That's the term was coined in the Panday era. And we think it's about time that it has to stop. Again, the UNC has spent 5 years, talked about campaign finance reform, but has achieved nothing and done nothing. So that we're not going to reinvent the wheel with this thing. We're going to look at models that are in place in the United Kingdom, in the United States, and other developed countries, and we're going to move immediately to enact appropriate campaign finance legislation. So that deals with the whole question of bringing back morality and integrity. And finally, we're going to institute a General Accounting Office, because the annual budget exercise is simply a speech by the Minister of Finance, contentious budget debate, commentary from one or two people for a couple days, and then that's the end of it. There's no accounting to the taxpayer for the way their money is spent. So we're instituting a General Accounting Office, which will do an analysis in real time of the actual performance and outturn of the budget in terms of revenue collection, in terms of expenditure, to see how the government is performing in terms of its budget promises. Next slide, please. Next one. Text, please. Thank you very much. Well, I already spoke about the Integrity Commission. In terms of, could I get the text back, please? Thank you very much. In terms of dealing with injustice in the society, we thought the time had come, and this is a departure for the PNM. We thought the time had come to establish an appropriate set of minimum wage rates set on data from household budgetary surveys and the cost of living index. We also have another innovation where we're going to create employment exchanges as part of our local government reform process, where in the regional corporations, there will be an employment exchange where workers can go, anybody can go, and get information on employment available in the public sector, and we want to incorporate the private sector in due course in their particular region, and they can access meaningful employment through the regional corporations. So that this is all part of our reform process to make local government more meaningful. In terms of tripartite discussions, the tripartite system, as far as we are concerned, has fallen apart over the last 5 years. There's been no dialogue. There's been no meaningful forum for discussions between government, labor, and business. In fact, you've had a Minister of Labor who has been treated as a pariah by the labor movement and, condemned. There's been no synergy between government, labor, and business. So we're going to immediately work with labor and business and reestablish that system, that partnership between these three arms of employment and economic activity, and discuss national policy, discuss economic policies in terms of how they impact on business and labor, and try and achieve some consensus for both the people who represent workers and for the people that create jobs to engender business confidence. We also want to move away very swiftly from the government by VAPs that has occurred over the last 5 years and establish an economic development board, which would have, again, one of its main responsibilities to develop and maintain dialogue between the government, the private sector, the labor movement, and any other stakeholder on long-term economic and social goals for the country, so that the budget will not simply be the only economic policy instrument available for citizens of this country. Next page, please. Text. This is something that we've seen actually coming from some stakeholders in the business community. We thought that we could expand the economy as a catalyst for our diversification thrust. We can reach out to the West Indian diaspora. For example, it is said there are 60,000 Trinidadians living in Brooklyn alone. It is said there are 500,000 Trinidadians living in the United States. So we thought that as part of the marketing of our goods and services, we could reach out to our diaspora abroad in the United Kingdom, in Canada, and in the United States, and bring them in as a potential market for our goods and services, and work with our manufacturers to achieve this, and also harness the skills and talent of our educated Trinidadians who, for one reason or another, have gone abroad. In terms of information, because over the last 5 years, one of the weaknesses of the Trinidad and Tobago economy has been the lack of information. So one of the key areas that we're going to move swiftly to deal with is the collapse of the Central Statistical Office. Some of you may not know, but workers in the CSO have been working out of their homes for the last couple of years because they have no proper accommodation. And there is draft legislation which speaks to an independent statistical institute, quasi-independent statistical institute, with a board with wide representation from the public sector, the private sector, the central bank, the universities, and so on. So we're going to move swiftly to create this independent statistical institute, which will give us real-time, genuine, and honest data on which we can build our policies, whether it is in the social sector or economic policies, our transportation network, and so on. Next slide, please. Let's move swiftly to national security. As I said, one of the failures of the UNC-led government has been their failure to contain crime, especially murders. One of the things they did when they came in was to dismantle the national security apparatus for reasons best known to themselves. They canceled the OPV contract. They shut down the special anti-crime unit. They marginalized the training organization that had been put in place to deal with senior staff. They dismantled our forensic capability and so on. So we were going to move swiftly to rebuild all of that, to rebuild our Coast Guard so we can patrol our borders properly, restore confidence in the armed services, reconstruct our anti-gang systems, which are completely gone, reconstruct our forensic systems and our criminal surveillance systems. And one of the ways we're going to deal with our borders, because it's well known, everybody knows, Trinidad and Tobago is a transshipment point for illegal drugs coming out of South America, South and Central, from the producer countries in Peru, in Colombia, and so on. The drugs come through Venezuela, find their way into Trinidad, and then leave from here to go off to North America and United Kingdom. But with the drugs come guns. This is well established, it has been well documented. And this is one of the reasons why we have so many illegal guns in Trinidad and Tobago, because they come as part of the drug trade. But our borders are porous. So we are moving swiftly, not just to rebuild the Coast Guard, which has been more or less dismantled over the last 5 years, but we're also going to establish a joint border protection agency, which would include the police, customs, the defense force, and of course the Coast Guard. And let there be interagency cooperation. It's part of a whole of government approach that we'll be bringing in. So every agency that has a responsibility to deal with border protection will be part of this joint border protection agency. Next slide. The other focus, and the political leaders spoke about it at the launch of our candidates, is bringing the solution to crime into the communities. You will see later on, one of our main policies will be to establish local constabularies within each region, but we're also going to establish and operationalize community safety partnerships dealing with specific problems: drug and alcohol abuse, local crime, reoffending, which is one of our biggest problems, and also the design of communities to minimize the occurrence of crime. In terms of the police service, again, we've witnessed the spectacle of an insecure leadership in the police service over the last 5 years, where we've had an acting commissioner now since 2012. There was a failed experiment with 2 Canadians who were brought in to head our police service, and then they were summarily sent home. And since then, since 2012, we've had an acting commissioner of police having just rolling over 6 months extensions, so that we in the PNM are going to deal with that almost immediately. Despite the UNC having a special majority, they took no action over the last 5 years to amend the procedures for the appointment of a police commissioner. That is going to be one of our first priorities, to go straight to the Parliament and amend the regulations that deal with the appointment of a police commissioner. And a special majority is not required for that, it's a simple majority. And we will put new systems in place so that we can have a permanent, effective, competent, and capable police commissioner in place within a matter of months. We're also going to establish a police management agency. Could I get the next slide, please? And this police management agency is going to deal with all aspects of management of the police service, dealing with leadership, professionalism, making sure there's proper training, proper skills, make sure you have the proper combination of personnel within the police force, make sure police work is evidence-driven, and there's proper forensic capability, restore morale to the police service, and so on. We thought it was necessary that a special agency is now required to deal with the management of the police force. Of course, this will be done in consultation with the First Division and the Second Division, because we don't believe in doing anything by VAPs. We also want, as I said, adopt a whole-of-government approach to national security. As you can see, we're amending the procedures for the appointment of a commissioner. We're focusing on regional corporations. We're establishing an agency. Could I get the next one, please? In terms of disaster management, we need to have a policy. One of the weaknesses of the system of government in Trinidad and Tobago right now is there's no policy for anything. So one of the things we will do to deal with mitigating the risk and the effects of disasters, flooding and so on, will be to develop a disaster risk management policy. Next slide. In terms of our prisons are bursting at their seams. We have a virtual revolution by prisoners, and I just spoke about an armed jailbreak, and of course the conditions are inhumane. But there's no policy. So again, one of the things we're going to deal with immediately is to develop a policy on prison management, dealing with the system as a whole, the facilities, healthcare within the prisons, and again, one of our highest priorities will be rehabilitation of offenders and also the protection of the people that work there. Security for prison officers, because they are an at-risk group. Prison officers are at risk. You would have heard of all the threats and violence against prison officers. So we're going to deal with the people who actually have to manage the system. Next slide. And of course, again, moving away from this government by VAPs thing, everything will be scientifically based, data-driven, and we'll have an intelligence-led national security system. Next slide. One of the other problems, and we spent a lot of time in this manifesto on crime because we know it's the biggest problem in Trinidad and Tobago, is youth criminality. So we're going to have intervention strategies that deal with things like bullying, low attainment, issues with parenting, socioeconomic stress, and so on. All of these things contribute to antisocial behavior by our youth. So we're going to have systematic prevention, intervention, suppression, targeting juvenile violence, guns, drugs, gangs, social development strategies, trying to move people away from becoming involved in offending behavior, and an aggressive public outreach program into the communities that are at risk, at most risk of developing young offenders. Next slide, please. Okay, that's it for national security. In terms of energy, well, as far as we are concerned, the management of the energy sector over the last 5 years has been an unmitigated disaster. We've lost 25% of our oil production. Oil production in 2010 was over 100,000 barrels a day. It's now just about 80,000. Natural gas production has declined to the extent that the gas-based industries, such as the petrochemical industries at Point Lisas, are running at maybe 85% of their capacity. And you will have seen reports from the Point Lisas companies that because of the shortages in the supply of natural gas, they've lost over $10 billion in revenue over the last 5 years. We're going to move immediately to deal with that because we know what the problem is. Could I see the text, please? Well, actually not that one. Sorry. We know what the problem is in the energy sector. We know that there are quantities of gas that are available. We know that some of the large multinational companies are holding back and that they are not moving forward to maximize the production of natural gas. So what we're going to do, one of the first things we're going to do, what the next PNM government will do with respect to the energy sector, is to have a formal consultation with all stakeholders, the upstream producers, such as BP and BHP and BGA, which has now been taken over by Shell, the midstream in terms of companies like the NGC that collect the gas and then distribute it and sell it to the downstreamers, who are the ones who take the natural gas and convert it into products like ammonia and methanol and so on, and Atlantic LNG liquefies our natural gas and then exports it. We need to have a consultation. The United Kingdom faced the same problem when they had an unattractive taxation regime, and they used a system, a legislative system, where they had a call for evidence, which was published by the minister responsible for energy in the United Kingdom, and they brought all the stakeholders together in discussion forums and also asked them to submit memorandums so that there could be consensus among everyone, the government, labor, and all of the players in the energy sector on the way forward to get our oil production back up to the levels that are required to run our economy. I'll give you an example of one of the things we're going to do, and that is dealing with stranded oil and gas. There's a lot of oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago, which with the current fiscal regime is uneconomical to produce. But if we adjusted the fiscal regime, you would see aggressive exploration for oil and gas, both on land and at sea, that is stranded now because it is not economical to produce at this point in time. Could I get the... And this is what I was talking about. We're going to create an environment in which the producer companies become aggressive about seeking new discoveries in oil and gas. Because we do believe that the gas is there. We just need to motivate the producers to get it for us and to bring it to market. We're also going to develop strategies to monetize the discovery of oil and gas in deep waters. Because again, some of the new discoveries are in deep waters, and you need to incentivize and motivate the companies involved. And I spoke about stranded oil and gas. So let's move on. As I said, we're going to have discussions with all the players, but one of the new innovations of this PNM government, this next one, headed by our political leader, will be to encourage the growth of locally owned energy sector companies. Think about it. The major players in our sector are all foreign. 90% of the production and exploration and so on benefits foreign companies. So we need to encourage local participation and local ownership of energy companies so that the money remains in Trinidad and Tobago. The money that is earned from our petroleum sector, which is about 60% of our revenues, remains in Trinidad and Tobago. So this is one of the key areas of focus of the new PNM government. Next slide. As I said, ensure more local participation, more local content. Let's move on. I'm just giving highlights. We will deal with, you will see it in the manifesto, all of the details. Let's move on. One of the biggest problems we face as a country is the fact that there are long-term gas supply contracts which are responsible for the supply of gas to the engine of our economy, the supply of gas to Atlantic LNG, the supply of gas to Point Lisas, and so on. These long-term gas supply contracts were negotiated many years ago, and they're going to run out within the next 2 years or so. One of the failures of this UNC government is not to sit down with the producers, like BP and so on, and start the process to negotiate and finalize new gas supply contracts. So this is one of the major challenges for the new PNM government coming in. We're going to have to deal with that because these contracts are expiring in 2017 and 2018, and this fuels our entire economy. So it's going to be a major policy initiative to sit down with the producer companies and negotiate new 15 and 20-year contracts. And of course, restore our reputation as an attractive, corruption-free destination for investment in the energy sector. Can we move on to another area, please? Arts and culture. Let's move to the text right away, please. Thank you. This is some of our specific policies. We felt that in Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have purpose-built venues. Every time a venue is constructed, there's a complaint that it is not designed to accommodate our local artists. So we felt the time has come to develop purpose-built venues to accommodate small, medium, and large activities, but in consultation with the local community, the people who are involved in arts and culture. Sit down with them, find out how many theaters we need in Trinidad and Tobago, what size they should be, what facilities they should have. Sit down with the entertainment professionals, determine what sorts of entertainment venues we require in Trinidad and Tobago, and design and implement purpose-built venues to host cultural events and entertainment activities. We also felt that for far too long, our arts and culture sector did not have a focus on commercial viability, and we feel now is the time to encourage commercial viability and commercial vision in the creative industries so that this can become a growth sector for the economy and can create a substantial number of new meaningful jobs. In terms of new media platforms, you've had an explosion of internet-driven platforms now. You have Instagram, you have YouTube, you have Twitter, you have a variety of new media-driven platforms or new platforms, new electronic platforms that didn't exist. When I was first elected, for example, we didn't have any of these things. But this is now the new age. This is the age, as I said, of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So we need to encourage and facilitate the growth and participation and enjoyment of all forms of activity in these new media platforms. In terms of the schools, we need to get our local communities formally involved in the school system and the local government bodies. We need to have a partnership, a synergy between our artistic groups, our cultural groups and so on, and the school system, so it's formalized and it becomes part of the curriculum and becomes part of school life. We also believe there's time to establish incentive programs to support innovation in culture. We need to look at the taxation regime and a fiscal incentive regime to encourage the growth and development of culture and the arts as a source of economic activity and a source of growth for our economy. And we also have to look at legislation. We have complaints all the time from the media and the creative industries about the legislative environment, that it is not enabling, that is restrictive. So one of the first things this new PNM government will do is sit down with all of the stakeholders in the media and in the creative industries and look at what is wrong with our legislative framework and see what we can do to reduce the bureaucracy and reduce the regulation to allow growth of this sector. Next area, please. Trade and industry. Can I go straight to the text, please? Thank you. You may not know this. If you listen to the other side, if you look at their so-called manifesto, they say they're going to double jobs in manufacturing in the next 2, something like that. If you actually look at the figures, and this holds for agriculture as well, there's been a constant decline in real output in the manufacturing sector since 2012. If you even go on the TTMA website, you'll see that stated as a fact. And if you look at the data from the central bank, there's been a decline in the manufacturing sector over the last 3 years. We need to fix this. Because apart from the oil sector, which is the engine of our economy, we must diversify and we must build, nurture, and grow our non-oil sector, which is essentially our manufacturing sector and our services sector. We have to, again, sit down with the stakeholders. This new PNM government will be characterized by dialogue, consultation, feedback, and an effort to reach consensus with all the players. So the first thing we're going to do is establish a permanent system of dialogue with all stakeholders in the commercial, manufacturing, and industrial sectors to look at their challenges. We know one of their main challenges is shortage of foreign exchange. We know that's a big problem. That's one of the first things we will do, is sit down with the people in industry to talk about this foreign exchange problem and put our heads together and see what can be done together with the experts to devise a more productive and a more beneficial and more effective foreign exchange availability system. But there are also shortages of skilled labor, problems with customs documentation, and there are issues, challenges that our manufacturing sector face in terms of the whole global trade liberalization movement. So we have to sit down with them and talk with them and see what they want and see if we can fashion programs and policies that will assist them to deal with all of these problems, shortages of labor, problems with foreign exchange, customs documentation, and so on. We're going to completely operationalize the Tamana Intech Park. We left that there for them. They've done nothing with it for the last 5 years. We have the Piarco Aero Park. I remember as Minister of Works and Transport back in 2009, taking a note to Cabinet to establish the industrial park next to the Piarco Airport and getting approval from Cabinet and getting a source of funding, and the design was all completed. And what has happened over the last 5 years? They just put in some roads next to the airport. They have not established any industries. We're going to move swiftly to operationalize that aero park next to the Piarco Airport and also operationalize the Tamana Intech Park and also deal with all of the other industrial estates in Trinidad and Tobago, especially in the deep south and in the central Trinidad area and in our new growth areas that we are going to develop in the northeast and the southeast of Trinidad and Tobago. We're going to move aggressively to get these industrial parks moving, operating, and growing. We're going to focus on specific industries to diversify our economy. We spoke about this 5 years ago. They haven't done anything. These were plans 5 years ago: agriculture, agro-processing, maritime services like shipbuilding, fishing and fish processing, aviation services. We could easily become a regional center for aircraft maintenance and aircraft modification. The creative industries is another area for diversification. I spoke about that, making it an economic growth pole. Financial services. We feel that Trinidad and Tobago is poised to become the financial center of the Caribbean and, in fact, this part of the region. Software design and applications. And, of course, as I said previously, dealing with problems at our ports. And in particular, we see the large Latin American market as a huge growth area for our local manufacturers. Our manufacturers are maxed out. If you talk to any of them, you talk to people from Neil and Massey, you talk to people from Anson McCall, and any of the large manufacturers in Trinidad and Tobago, they've maxed out in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of the growth they can achieve. They're maxed out in the Caribbean, which has its own problems. So the only area for them to grow is Latin America, Central and South America. So that's going to be a major push of the next PNM government, assisting our manufacturers to gain entry into the Latin American market. And of course, we're going to revive the CARICOM single market and economy, which has stalled. I think it started to go downhill when the present Prime Minister made the statement that Trinidad and Tobago is not an ATM machine. And I think that set the stage for a complete deterioration in relationships between Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean. And it has had adverse effects on trade. Next area, please. The environment. Now, when you read this manifesto, you'll see it's a little different from other manifestos. There are certain areas that we thought need emphasis. I just want to make a general statement. If you look at Dr. Rowley's introduction, you will see he made the point, we can't put everything in a manifesto. Even though we have plans for everything, we can't put everything in a manifesto. It'll be 1,000 pages long. So that, text please, so that if you see something that is not specifically mentioned, please go to the Vision 2020 document and all of the rollout documents and successive build-out plans that came out of that Vision 2020 document since it was launched way back in 2003, I believe. So our policy, we will use what is not specifically mentioned in the manifesto. We will use our PNM policy, which is published on our PNM website, and also our Vision 2020 policy as a starting point for the policies for the sectors not specifically mentioned in here. But in terms of environment, I think the time has come to put environment at the heart of development. Every decision the government takes will have an environmental consideration. There must be a clear action plan for waste management. We must deal with the beat-em dump, for example, once and for all. We feel we need to promote energy efficiency, renewable energy, in order to make Trinidad have a lower carbon footprint, have a focus on a green economy. We want to incentivize households to conserve water. We waste a lot of water in Trinidad. We must have a flood resilience policy to deal with the ravages of flooding. We just have rain and flood every year, but there's no policy in terms of environment. If you look at the Northern Range, for example, we need to reforest the entire Northern Range. We need to manage the forested areas on the Northern Range to prevent the incidence of flooding. So we need to halt deforestation. That will be a major focus of the next PNM government, dealing with reforestation along the Northern Range and other areas that have been damaged over the years. We need to increase public spaces, green public spaces. We need to deal with climate change, that problem that occurred in Mayaro, where you had a terrible flood that washed away the road to Mayaro. That was a symptom of climate change. The weather has changed. The weather patterns are changing. We need in this country to take climate change very seriously and have climate change adaptation as a major government policy. We need to talk to our farmers to have sustainable agricultural practices, to move away from slash and burn agriculture. So we've put environment in as a major focus of the next PNM government. Next area, please. Infrastructure, well, we've been talking about this for years. Can I just go to the text, please? One of the major policies, which is in the document, of course, is our mass transit system. And I want to make it very clear that any mass transit system that the PNM develops in this country will be certified by an international agency as being appropriate and feasible, and it will be done in consultation with all stakeholders in the transportation system, including the taxi drivers, commuters, road users, and so on. Any plan we do will be done with extreme consultation, but we are convinced that our solution, which is the implementation of an appropriate railway system, is the best solution. But before we implement, we're going to engage in consultation with everyone that will be affected by this, the people that use the roads and the people that provide transportation. In terms of highways, we've said this before, we need to complete that San Fernando to Point Fortin highway, but do it in a way that is in the best interest of all concerned. We need to build the San Fernando to Mayaro freeway. When I was Minister of Works again back in 2010, we actually received tenders for the San Fernando to Mayaro freeway. That would open up the whole eastern and southeastern part of Trinidad and Tobago as a growth area. Those plans have been gathering dust in the Ministry of Works since 2010. Again, we are designing the Wallerfield to Manzanilla Highway. Again, opening up the northeast section of Trinidad and Tobago. Those plans have been gathering dust in the ministry again since 2010. Of course, we need to improve the road system to Chagaramas, and we will look at whether it is feasible to do a causeway, a highway, or a combination of causeway and highway. Everything we do will be scientific and data-driven. We will be building a road to Toko. That is part of our legacy in terms of rebuilding the whole northeast of Trinidad, because that area suffers from a lack of proper infrastructure. Those of you who have taken that drive from Valencia to Toko on that narrow, winding road, by the time you reach Toko, you're tired. Can you imagine if you have a first-class road going in as straight in an alignment as possible? You'll get there in less than 20 minutes if you have a proper road from Valencia to Toko. And that is why we also plan to construct a ferry port in Toko, because the journey from Toko to Tobago by fast ferry will just be 45 minutes. So it gives everybody who lives in East and South Trinidad an option. So when we establish that ferry port in Toko, we build that new road from Valencia, San Grande to Toko. It gives everybody who lives in East Trinidad and in South Trinidad the option. You can take the traffic into Port of Spain, get on the ferry, and then take 3 hours to get to Tobago. Or you can head to Toko and get to Tobago in 45 minutes. So we feel this is part of a national transportation plan. And as you've heard Dr. Rowley say, one of the things that he wants to see is that after this 5 years is over, one of the things the new PNM government will have done is to transform transportation in Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, we're going to look at ANC Transport to Tobago. We're not leaving out the south. We're building a new first-class road to Moruga. We believe we also need to kickstart economic activity in Moruga, so we're going to construct a new fishing port in Moruga, and the port of Spain needs to be moved. Any of you who have driven down Tragrit Road, when the ship is in and you get stuck in traffic behind all of these huge container trucks, will recognize the fact that the port of Spain is in the wrong place. That's how cities develop. You have a large port, the city grows around the port, but sooner or later, it has to move. So that one of the major initiatives of the new PNM government will be to construct a new container port south of the Beetham and open up this entire area from this hotel that we are in all the way down to Movie Town with new recreational facilities, with cultural facilities, with residential development, and make this whole section of Port of Spain a modern and vibrant area where we can enhance the quality of life of our citizens. Next section, please. And of course, we're building a new airport in Tobago. We've spoken about a new airport in Tobago for far too long. That will be a priority of this new PNM government. In terms of water management, we'll just briefly go through this. Can I go to the text, please? I heard one of the members of the other side saying the PNM has no plan for water. Well, they hadn't read our manifesto, because we're going to use an integrated water resource management system. We have to monitor our water resources. We have to create an appropriate institutional framework for effective water management. We're going to implement a water loss reduction program. And specifically, because we've been hit by drought over the last 10 years, Trinidad and Tobago has been hit by drought on several occasions. We need a drought management plan, and of course, a flood management plan and wastewater management program. But there's more in the manifesto on that. We have an intensive water sector management plan. Next area, please. Education. Well, it goes without saying, just go to the text, please, that every innovation in education in Trinidad and Tobago since 1956 is an innovation from the People's National Movement, from universal primary education, universal secondary education, and universal higher education, or tertiary education as it is called. Before the advent of the People's National Movement and Dr. Eric Williams, it wasn't easy to get an education in this country. It was available only for the privileged few. and you had something called an exhibition, where just about 200 persons, 200, think about it, almost 20,000 people, children in Trinidad and Tobago do the SCA exam every year. But in those days, just 200 people were allowed to get into secondary school through the exhibition system. The PNM changed all of that. We started an aggressive school building program. We started to expand the University of the West Indies. We created the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And we introduced, as I said, and I think I need to reinforce this point, because there are some young people today who just don't know that it was the PNM that introduced free university education in Trinidad and Tobago. Firstly under the Williams and Chambers administrations, and then under the Manning administration, where we reintroduced free university education through the government assistance for tuition expenses, or GATE as it is commonly known. GATE is a PNM innovation, and we thought it is necessary to educate our population as the only way to pull ourselves out of the challenges that face us as a developing country. So we will continue to support GATE and make sure it's available for everybody who needs it. In terms of our universities, we're going to support them. UWI, UTT. We have to bring UTT back to its central moorings, which is a technological-based university that was developed specifically to deal with challenges within our manufacturing, industrial, commercial, and energy sectors, and has now branched out into other areas. But we need to bring UTT back to its core function, its core purpose, which was a center of excellence, dealing specifically, targeting the economic sectors in Trinidad and Tobago. We promote adult education, continuing education, and most importantly, it is time we formalize the whole concept of second chances for children in schools, because a lot of children just fall out of the system because for one reason or another, health problems, problems at home, they fall out of the system. We need to give these children a second chance. So we're going to formalize a mechanism for second chances for students at all levels. And of course, continue our policy of universal early childhood education, primary education, secondary education, tertiary education. We're going to integrate sports, culture, language arts, and physical education in the education system. And to deal with this laptop story, what's the point of a laptop if you can't connect to the internet, if there's no computer lab, if the teachers are not trained in ICT? What's the point of that? So one of the things that the PNM will do to make sure these laptops actually work in schools is we're going to make sure that all schools have fast and easy access to fast broadband internet. That is what is missing from so many of our schools. Provide advancements for teachers in their career. Make sure the education and training of our teachers is adequate to meet modern challenges. Implement a comprehensive annual continuous program of school maintenance, because every year in September, the Minister of Education is faced with protesting parents and children because schools are not available. That's because the school repair program is ad hoc and it's done in bits and pieces. It's not an annual program. So one of the things the new Minister of Education will have to do is to implement a continuous program of school maintenance and make sure that schools are always ready and in proper condition for our children and our teachers. And of course, we'll deal with all the dilapidated school buildings. We'll build new schools where they are required. And one of the things I'd like to focus on is that the curriculum has changed to the extent that history and geography have been de-emphasized in the school curriculum. We're going to change that. I can tell you personally, even though I am an engineer by profession and I dabble in law, one of my best subjects in school was history. And I got a deep appreciation of the history of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean because of that. We're going to re-emphasize the teaching of history and geography in our schools. And of course, mobilize the artistic community to take a leading role in education and cultural education. Next area, please. Local government, well, we've spoken at this at length. I don't think I need to go into any great details on this. I will just tell you briefly that we intend to give local government bodies autonomy. We intend to give them authority. We intend to give them a secure source of funding so that certain taxes collected within regions will be available to local government bodies to give them the necessary cash flow. We're going to devolve many of the services that are now done by central government, like school maintenance, for example, that I spoke about, will now be done by the local government bodies. Certain social services, the delivery of social services will be done by local bodies. Of course, we will have to improve the skill set and the level of persons coming into the system. And we're also going to get the local government bodies much more involved in policing through the community policing and the local constabulary system. Can we move on? You have a lot of detail on our local government policies in our local government manifestos. In housing, well, again, that's an area I don't think I need to go into any great detail. PNM has built the vast majority of houses in this country. In the 2002 to 2010 period, we started the construction of 25,000 houses. Some of them completed, some of them partially completed, and the present government is, by and large, simply handing out houses that the PNM built in the 2002 to 2010 period. We are known for our aggressive housing program. We are known for a policy of giving people affordable and appropriate housing. So we have all our programs which we will continue, our accelerated high density program, our rent-to-own program, subsidized low-interest loans, new home subsidies, home improvement grant. One of the things I want to focus on, the PNM administration, before it demitted office, had started a program of lot identification in targeted informal communities or squatter communities as they are known. The only way you can give a squatter on state land security of tenure is that you have to identify the boundaries of the piece of land that he or she occupies. And we had started a comprehensive program of lot identification, or lotification as it is known, as a precursor to giving out statutory leases, because the deed of comfort is not much. It's just a piece of paper. All a deed of comfort does to a squatter is it allows him to remain where he or she is without being evicted, but you can't take a deed of comfort to the bank. It's not an ownership, it's not title. So one of the things the PNM is going to do is to return to our program of lot identification and aggressively start a process of issuing statutory leases to people living on state lands. That's what they want, so that they can get a loan from the bank, improve their homes, and convert their very unsatisfactory accommodation that they have now into proper modern housing. I can't believe that for 5 years, this UNC government has not given one statutory lease to one squatter on state lands. We are going to deal with that. And of course, we need to deal with the living condition, because not only lot identification were we doing, but we were improving infrastructure, building drains, building roads, improving water supply, electricity. We're going to have an aggressive program as well on that, dealing with drainage, which is a big problem in squatter communities, regularizing and putting in modern drainage systems for people living on state lands. Let's move on to the next area. Tobago, well, we have a very long section on Tobago because we felt that it was necessary that Tobago is treated specially. And the way we are addressing Tobago is that we are going to be using the Tobago Council of the PNM as an integral part of our policy and the method with which we will approach the development of Tobago. Tobago Council, the THA, has already developed a comprehensive economic development plan. So we will give them the necessary support that they need for that. Could I get the next section, please? Go, the green, the one with the green things on it, please. Thank you. No, that one. All right, don't bother. One of the things we need to do with the THA is we need to restructure the management and operations of the air bridge and the sea bridge. I don't know how many of you have tried to go to Tobago in the last year, but it's not easy. I have tried, and I found myself stuck in the airport. I found myself stuck in the port. We need to deal with the problems in the ferry service, and in the domestic air bridge once and for all. And we're going to sit down with the House of Assembly and come up with meaningful and effective approaches so that everybody in Trinidad, within reason, who wants to travel to Tobago, and everybody in Tobago who wants to travel to Trinidad, and all of our foreign visitors will be able to travel between Trinidad and Tobago with relative ease. Right now, it's extremely difficult. If you go and try and book a flight to Tobago, you'll find the flights are booked out for weeks. We also want to ensure that Tobago is represented on all national boards and committees in Trinidad and Tobago, especially those government agencies that have the responsibility for the delivery of goods and services to Tobago. We're also going to look at security in Tobago, because not just for the security of Tobagonians, we also need to look at the security of visitors, because Tobago is a tourism-driven economy, and we need to ensure the safety of visitors to Tobago. We're going to support an accelerated housing program in Tobago, including partnership with the private sector. We're going to have a specific tourism security action plan. Could I get the next page, please? Social sector programs. But there's a lot on Tobago in the manifesto, and I just encourage you to read it. It includes a new airport for Tobago. It includes boosting manufacturing at the industrial parks. It involves urban renewal in Roxborough and in Scarborough, and it involves a proper approach to internal self-government to Tobago within the unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago. So I encourage you to just read the manifesto. You'll see a lot of details on Tobago, but everything will be done in consultation with Tobagonians, using Tobago Council as the instrument to develop Tobago. In terms of the social sector, one of the problems with the social sector is that the programs don't always serve the purpose intended. And we need to talk to the people who receive welfare, people who are disabled, old age pensioners, people with disability, people who get disability assistance. We need to speak to them, fire victims, people who depend on the state for relief. We need to talk to them so that we can design programs that are better targeted for the people for whom they're intended. We need to focus on special groups, the elderly, children, and disabled people and other disadvantaged groups. We need to have data-driven scientific approach to all of our social sector programs. We need feedback. We need to review. We need to measure. We need to monitor. We spend billions of dollars every year as a country on a social safety net. But is it really working? Is it helping those who are really in need? Are you getting value for money? Is it efficient? One of the things we're going to do is we're going to partner with civil society. We feel the time has come that we must formally introduce community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, and religious bodies, especially at the community level, as partners in a new system of social services, social justice, and provision of social services to the poor and indigent. We are satisfied now that some of these groups are much better equipped to handle services to deal with reoffenders, for example, restorative justice, and also the delivery of social service. They are far better equipped and better able than a top-heavy bureaucratic government system. So our approach to social services in the next PNM government will be to incorporate civil society into the delivery of social services and also consult with the people for whom the help is intended. Can I get the next section, please? We have a whole section on people with disabilities, and it involves essentially consultation. We're going to talk to them. First, we're going to look at the programs. The programs that are in place right now to help people with disabilities. Do they really work? Do they really help? Are we getting value for money? Are we really helping this special group? Are there gaps in the system? We need to do a census. How many people with disabilities do we really have in Trinidad and Tobago? Do we know? We can't get that information from the CSO because the CSO has collapsed. So we need to get either a revamped CSO or another agency involved, do a census to determine how many people with disabilities there are in Trinidad and Tobago and what are their needs, and then come up with, as I said, scientific, evidence-based, data-driven policies. And then we need to talk to them. Because again, this is an area where you as a government might feel you're doing the most wonderful thing, but you're not really helping these people. So we need to talk to them, the interest groups, concerned citizens, disabled people themselves, and develop the strategies. So it's a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. Could I get the next section, please? Rural development. Well, what we're going to do with this is we're using agriculture as the catalyst to grow and develop economic activity in rural areas. But what we're going to do is bring all aspects of rural development under one head, all agencies, to make sure there's coordination and you have the most effective system for developing rural areas. And that is why we will have a Ministry of Rural Development specifically dealing with the problems, the needs, and the aims and objectives and aspirations of people living in rural areas. Next section, please. Agriculture. Well, we have a comprehensive agriculture plan. Again, could I get the text, please? That's another area that has declined. You know, you had some ministers there that just talk, you know. You have Mr. Bharat, you have Mr. Maharaj, they just talk. But if you look at the figures, agriculture's output has declined consistently since the UNC came into office. We need to deal with that. And the only way to deal with that is to have a plan. Because they are governing by VAPs. We are going to govern by science and data and evidence and proper planning. So one of the first things we will do is develop a comprehensive agricultural sector plan with the main objectives of increasing employment and increasing that sector's contribution to GDP. Because agriculture's contribution to GDP is now less than 1%. And we feel one of the ways we can do this, we can kickstart this sector, is have a wide-ranging program of tax and duty concessions on all of their inputs. We also need to restore land administration to the Ministry of Agriculture. This new government has split up these agencies involved with forestry, fisheries, lands. We're going to bring them all back together under one roof because we need a holistic approach to lands, agriculture, and marine resources. Next section, please. We need to deal with wholesale markets. One of the biggest problems for farmers is access roads and irrigation. They need technical assistance. We need to motivate people to become agricultural entrepreneurs, and we need to talk to farmers. Let's move on. Small business development. Could I get the text, please? These are some of this is the 7 platforms for development of this sector: institutional strengthening, legislation, tax incentives, training, funding, and the Fair Share program. And those of you who study business all over the world, you realize that 90% of businesses in the world are small. In Europe, 90% of the businesses in Europe have less than 10 people working in them. This country was built on small business. The United States was built on small business. So we know what they want. They need help in terms of an enabling legislative framework. They need fiscal incentives. They need funding. They need startup capital. They need help because it's a small business, because it's just beginning. We need to help small businesses grow and become medium and large businesses. So we're going to have a targeted focus in terms of technical assistance, funding, incentives, training, and so on. So let's move on to another section, please. I just want to point out these are simply highlights. You will get more details in the manifesto. In terms of healthcare, what I can tell you is that we're certainly not going to repeat the mistakes made by the present administration. We have a chronic shortage of doctors and nurses in this country, and professions allied to medicine. All our existing hospitals have chronic shortages. This is why over the years, successive governments have gone to India, Africa, the Philippines, and in the case of the PNM, we went to Cuba.
to get health professionals, because we simply don't have the required numbers of doctors and in particular nurses. One of the problems we have in Trinidad and Tobago is the migration of nurses, because our training is quite good here in Trinidad and Tobago, and foreign agencies come and snatch our nurses and take them away, and you know, with attractive compensation packages. So we have shortages in every hospital in Trinidad and Tobago, and yet this government is building new hospitals. Where are they going to get the staff from? This new hospital in Cuba, for example. They're going to have to take doctors and nurses from Port of Spain, from Mount Hope, from Sangre Grande, from San Fernando, to populate the hospital in Cuba. What does that do? You have a half-full hospital in Cuba. You have a depopulated hospital in San Fernando and Port of Spain and Mount Hope and so on. It's an inefficient solution. So what we will do instead, rather than spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on facilities that may not be the best use of taxpayers' dollars, we're going to focus aggressively on training and compensation packages for our doctors and nurses, to give them the training they require, to expand the numbers of doctors and nurses exponentially in this country, and also to give them the type of compensation package and working conditions that they need to stay in Trinidad and Tobago. We're going to focus on primary health care. For those of you who are not in the medical profession, primary health care is the health care offered in the community, at the health centers, at the district health facilities. It's preventative. When you get to a hospital, you're already sick. You need surgery, or you need a procedure. All successful healthcare systems in the world focus on a very strong primary healthcare system to deal with lifestyle diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and so on, chronic diseases as they're called. So you deal with these problems in the community, at the clinics, at the health centers, to prevent persons from getting to the stage where they require hospitalization. In Trinidad, we have a focus on hospitalization. All progressive countries have a focus on health prevention of health issues, and that's dealt with at the primary level in the community. So some of our priority areas would include a focus on chronic non-communicable diseases, which is the bane of our existence, as I said, diabetes, hypertension, and so on. Maternal and child health, care of the elderly, it's a big problem. Outreach visits of vulnerable populations, dental health, mental health, and the support services required for the system, like radiographers, x-ray technicians, and so on, and environmental health in the community itself to deal with mosquito-borne diseases and so on. Could I get the next slide? One of our major initiatives will be to ensure that there's universal health care in Trinidad and Tobago. And let me just deal with this quickly. When I became a minister first in 1991, the Minister of Health at the time spoke about something called a health insurance system. That was John X. That's 24 years ago. We've reached 2015, and we have no health insurance system in Trinidad and Tobago. There are volumes gathering dust in the Minister of Health's office. Plan after plan, study after study, proposal after proposal for more than 20 years on introducing a health insurance system in Trinidad and Tobago. We're going to do that in this term. We don't need to do any more studies and any more endless research on this issue. We know what the problem is. We know what the solution is. You need to have government-funded insurance for people, for the poor, and you need to have an insurance plan for the rich. And when we introduce this health insurance system, anybody in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have set a target for ourselves, by the end of 2018, we're being realistic, we will have a functional health insurance system in Trinidad and Tobago, so that every citizen will be able to go to any health facility, whether public or private, and access quality health care through the national health insurance system. This is something that has been kicked around like a football for more than 20 years, and it's time it's implemented. And of course, we have all our other programs like the Chronic Disease Assistance Program, CDAP, which we introduce, free medication, medical aid, which provides financial assistance to the elderly, the indigent, and children. And while I'm on children, every day we hear more and more horror stories about the corruption in the Children's Life Fund. So one of the first things we will have to do is an audit of that fund to make sure that the money that is spent in the Children's Life Fund goes to the purpose intended, and that is saving children's lives, and it doesn't go into the pockets of corrupt agents. Could we go to the next area, please? Youth development. As you can see, this manifesto is very comprehensive. This youth policy was done by young people. We felt in Trinidad and Tobago, the time had come for older people, like myself and others, to stop telling young people what they need. So we asked them, what do you need? Tell us what kind of policy you want. And a youth policy was developed by young people. And one of the first things they need is help with youth micro-enterprise. So many young people want to start a little business. They don't know what to do. They can't access funding. So we're going to have a youth micro-enterprise program, which includes grant funding, local loan financing, and training. We're going to have a youth employment policy. We have no policy on youth employment in this country, specifically targeted to the varying needs of youths in diverse communities, different skill levels, different educational levels. We're going to have an annual youth expo to showcase the talent and the ingenuity and the creativity of our young people. We'll establish a youth development institute that will provide training on leadership. We'll encourage youths to become leaders in their communities through civic responsibility, through debates, through forums. And we also feel that within communities, you need to have facilities specifically targeted to young people to allow positive recreation, healthy lifestyles, and give vulnerable youth, at-risk youth, the fellas lying on the block, to use the vernacular, to have a safe haven to socialize while receiving coaching, counseling, and training. So they can get off the block and get into what we call a safe haven so they can socialize with other young people. And finally, we're going to have special emphasis on the rehabilitation of young offenders. Because if you look at the age profile in the prisons, you'll see your typical prisoner is 19 years old. Let's go to next one, please. Sport. Text, please. Again, we feel that this is an area where there's been government by VAPs, and that needs to stop. So we need to have specific policies like an athlete development system. We need to have the growth, and we need to motivate professions allied to sports, sports medicine, physical therapy, sports media. We need to promote sports tourism. Next one, please. Next text, please. We need to develop Trinidad and Tobago as a sporting brand. Jamaica has done this very well. As far as I'm concerned, we're better than them. We have more talent than Jamaica as far as I'm concerned. I'm not ashamed to say that. And I think we need to develop Trinidad and Tobago as a sporting brand. We need to have a census, again, data-driven, evidence-based. We need to do a census of sports and recreation in Trinidad and Tobago. Find out what's going on, what facilities are available, what is needed, what do our sportsmen and sportswomen require. We need to involve sports in all schools. We need to have intercollegiate competitions. That used to be a feature of Trinidad and Tobago school system. It no longer is. So we need to have intercollegiate sports as an active event on the school calendar. We need to have a sport research database. We need a sports institute focusing specifically on the needs and the plans and programs for sports. Of course, we need to deal with fiscal incentives, improve infrastructure, and promote sports as a way of life. Next one, please. And I want to emphasize, this is just highlights. Labor. See, we haven't left anybody out. We need to sit down and talk with the trade unions so that we can have a proper understanding of what the labor movement wants for Trinidad and Tobago, because they are part of us. The trade union movement is us. We're all part of it. We're all workers in one way or another. We need to talk to them, not get into fights with them, and not get into confrontations with them. And from this dialogue, have a clear framework for the rights and responsibilities of workers in the workplace. We need to protect the health and safety of workers. We need to have a policy on what is called migrant workers, workers that move around. For Tobago, we're going to include labor in the 5th schedule of the House of Assembly Act so that the THA would have responsibility for labor, which is not the case at this point in time. We need to look at the industrial court, look at the appointment process for judges in the industrial court, and so many other things. But all of the things we're going to do with labor, we're going to reestablish, rebuild, and strengthen and deepen the strong ties that the People's National Movement has with the labor movement, with regular interaction and dialogue and incorporation of the labor movement into all things that affect Trinidad and Tobago's economic policy, our working conditions, and our national life. Could I get the next one, please? Economic development. Well, this is actually trade unionism. We're looking at simplifying the recognition process, settling all outstanding negotiations, and making sure labor is involved in tripartite discussions with government, the private sector, and, government, private sector, and labor. Can I go to the next slide, please? International relations. One of the features of the last 5 years is that the people who man our embassies received these appointments as rewards for either losing elections or being members of a political party. That has been a feature of the last 5 years, that the people who head the embassies don't have the necessary skill set, commitment, training, experience, and qualifications to head our missions abroad. And we are going to ensure that appointments to embassies and missions abroad are not seen as simply rewards for being members of a political party. Our diplomats, our high commissioners, our consul generals, and so on, will have to be aggressively addressing the interests of Trinidad and Tobago in respect of trade and investment, looking at our specific interests, such as oil and natural gas and energy services. We're going to focus specifically on certain countries: Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Panama, that's in the Latin America continent, China, Kenya, Tanzania, Russia, Eastern Europe, Qatar, Dubai, Cuba, Curacao, and the Dominican Republic. We need to intensify and deepen relations. We have picked these countries as areas where we believe we can penetrate their markets in terms of the sale of goods and services manufactured or created in Trinidad and Tobago. We're going to restructure the foreign service to focus on issues: economic diplomacy, trade and investment, energy, security, environment, health, and so on. We're repurposing and refocusing our diplomatic missions to be effective and efficient, rather than, as I said, as just a reward for contesting as a candidate and losing an election. Let's go to the next one. Gender affairs. The PNM produced a national draft policy in 2009 in gender affairs that has been languishing for the last 5 years. They have done nothing, and we intend to use our 2009 policy document as a basis for starting the dialogue and once and for all settling this whole question of a gender policy in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's move on. Okay, could you take that off, please? I think I've given you a brief outline. As I said, these are just highlights. But you know, we have to show that we're different. So we've thought about what does our country want and what would they want to see from a PNM government in the first year in office. Now notice it's not the first 100 days. It's not the first 120 days. It's the first year. So we've looked at what is of importance to Trinidadians and Tobagonians, and this is what we'll be doing in the first year, among many other things. Now you could put it on. The annual personal allowance. It has been stuck at $60,000 for the last many years. We feel it's time to increase the annual personal allowance and put more disposable income into the hands of taxpayers. the problem with the cap on pensions. You hear pensions complaining about it all the time, especially people who have contributed to the national insurance system. That they've contributed to NIS, but there's a cap on the amount they can receive from the old age pension system. We're going to review that and see what we can do about increasing the cap on pension payments for people who receive both NIS and old age pension, again, putting more money in the hands of pensioners. You may be a bit surprised at this one. You heard the UNC say that in order to pay for rapid rail, Dr. Rowley will have to increase VAT. We're not increasing VAT, we're reducing VAT. And let me explain. When I was first employed in 1979, my tax rate was 70%. You remember those days? That when you're in the upper income bracket in Trinidad and Tobago, you had to pay 70%? Well, over the years, governments realized that the higher the tax rate, the higher the avoidance, and the lower the collections. And the PNM has a proud history over the years of reducing and harmonizing taxes and increasing collections. If you do the analysis, you will see as the tax rates came down, the tax collections went up exponentially. We've done our work, we've consulted with international experts, and we are satisfied that if we reduce VAT to 12.5%, not only would we have greater collections, we'll have much less avoidance, and it will result in a revenue increase rather than a revenue reduction. That has been the history of every tax reduction in Trinidad and Tobago. So we're taking this bold and aggressive step, and we're certain it will boost revenues and boost tax collection in Trinidad and Tobago. Our elderly. If you look at any progressive country in the world, they have special programs for the elderly. They treat their elderly specially. If you look at Panama, we've looked at the Panama, it's called Pensionado program. And what they do, they provide free or subsidized public services to retirees. And we think the time has come to treat our elderly and our retirees specially. And we're going to model this on the Panama Pensionado program. I can say right out, we'll have free driver's permits, free passports for retirees, and exemption from a wide range of taxes and charges. We're going to develop this over the next year. To help our farmers, we're going to exempt all agricultural inputs, approved chemicals, pest control, approved vehicles, fishing vessels from duties and taxes. Next one. We're going to incentivize landowners to revive abandoned estates. Next one. This one is designed to boost construction because we're going to identify facilities that will qualify for special attention. Multi-story car parks to deal with the chronic parking problems in Port of Spain, in San Fernando, in Arima, in all our urban, in Chaguanas, all our urban centers. Multi-story car parks, affordable housing, recreational facilities, sporting facilities, community facilities. We're going to give special tax holidays and tax incentives to motivate the private sector to get aggressively involved in these areas: affordable housing, multi-story car parks, and community facilities. Next one. Free broadband all over Trinidad and Tobago. Now, any of you have traveled abroad, if you go to Venice, for example, in Italy, Venice has a free Wi-Fi system designed specifically to attract tourists. But we think the time has come. We'll start with hotspots, because this is going to take a while. This may take a couple of years to develop, but we'll start with hotspots, areas which are frequently used by people, frequently populated, frequently visited. And we'll create free public hotspots, free Wi-Fi in these areas, and then eventually expand it to a free public broadband wireless system throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Next one. OJTs. A lot of our young people have no choice but to get into the OJT system, but the stipend is just too low. So we'll talk to our young people, we'll see what can be done, and we'll increase these stipends to meaningful levels. One of the problems we MPs and candidates encounter all the time, especially in squatter communities, is the atrocious quality of some of the housing for poor, indigent, and elderly. We need to deal with this. We need to aggressively target financial assistance, starter homes, and the like for the poor and for the indigent through home repair, improvement grants, and cash support. Next one. Renewable energy, we need to become a green economy. We need to focus on solar power and wind power, reduce our carbon footprint. Next one. Local constabularies, you heard Dr. Rowley talk about that on our candidate launch. But again, we feel we need to bring policing back to the community and have these police forces within each region in Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, to help with the security of our country, we need to provide incentives to homeowners to put in personal CCTV and alarm systems. And I think, oh, don't forget this one. We're going to remove the requirement for immigration forms at ports of entry. Those of you who travel to the United States will realize now all you have to do is present a customs form. If you travel to United Kingdom, Europe, same thing, a customs form. And the reason is we now have machine-readable passports. So all of your information, your photograph, your date of birth, your identification, your details are all in your machine-readable passport. So as soon as the passport is scanned, all of your data goes in the system. So why these forms? So the time has come to remove these cumbersome immigration forms at our airports and also reintroduce 10-year passports. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do this together. This is the PNM Manifesto. Are you first standing ovation? Get from all you?
Thank you, Mr. Imbert. I think we can all agree that regardless of what side of the fence you may lie on, that was a very impressive, comprehensive presentation. I mean, I think most things that most people are concerned about were covered, and I congratulate you, the PNM, and your team. So I now re-invite Mr. Imbert, I know you are tired, back onto the stage to join us, as well as Dr. Rowley, who will now field questions from the media.
Circulating the manifesto at this time. We're circulating. I just want to let you know we're circulating the manifesto of all of you at this time. It will come to you in a few minutes.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all very much for sitting through that comprehensive presentation of a summary. That is the end of a long road. We have about 20 or 25 minutes, and having detained the media for so long, we would be happy to take a few questions on any matter which you may want to raise now, and this is your opportunity to comment on the manifesto, ask any questions, and Mr. Imbert may have the answer. And if he doesn't have it, I will try to help.
Right.
Good afternoon. Faye Richards from TV6. Two questions at this point. What's the PNM's policy going forward on the fuel subsidy, as well as the context, I understand, is the 2030 vision, which you would have revised 2020 to extend to that period. So what would you tell the electorate in terms of what to expect to see in the next 5 years, and how much of this is really a longer-term plan?
The fuel subsidy is not targeted for removal, but for review as we go forward, because as the oil price drops, you know, the quantum of the subsidy will also fall. But we, in the context of the mass transit considerations, could see a relationship between both, where if we do invest in a mass transit, the commensurate response over time is to adjust the fuel subsidy. Because if the population has adequate mass transportation available, then one could embark upon some meaningful reduction in the fuel subsidy in a step-by-step arrangement. But in the immediate term, it's not on the cards. What we would want to do is to reduce waste and encourage the population to pay attention to the fact that when you travel, there's a cost to it. Because the one thing that does not cross the mind of the average person in Trinidad and Tobago when they think of a trip is the cost of the fuel. So we can begin that conversation now to reduce the actual consumption of fuel on the road.
And the second question about how much of this should people bank on for the next 5 years as opposed to a longer term plan? What can they say in the next 5 years should you come into office that they'll see accomplished?
One of the points we've made is that we want to have continuous policy development. This manifesto forms the basis for our plans and programs going forward. But you'll see the amount of entities that we're seeking to create, like an economic development board, for example, and the whole question of dialogue and establishing forums, the tripartite relationship between government, labor, and business. So whereas this manifesto is a starting point, over the next 5 years, one of the features will be constant dialogue with stakeholders in every area of the society to see how we can improve and build on this document. But everything you see in there is what we intend to do at bare minimum over the next 5 years.
Natasha Chum, I-95.5. Good afternoon.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Natasha Chum, I-95.5.
Okay.
Mr. Imbert, you said that there would be an introduction of a code of ethical standards to most parliamentarians. Does that also apply to members of your government if re-elected?
I think that question should be directed to Dr. Rowley.
I would take responsibility for that question, even though it's directed to Mr. Imbert. As head of the team, as leader of the party, and as leader of the government going forward, once we are successful, that responsibility will largely lie with the Prime Minister to ensure that the team of persons who is responsible for managing the country's affairs meet not just minimum standards, but the higher standards. And I've said out front on public platforms that on the question of morality in public affairs, while I don't want to hold myself out as a preacher and a moralist, but one has to take responsibility for what goes on in your government. And on that score, I would lead from the front.
Okay,
and if the regulations and the code of conduct would apply to anyone, it would apply to the members of parliament most and first and foremost. Because members of parliament are required to set the tone and the example for the country. And the parliament as a place of public business is the place where one expects that the highest standards in the country with respect to public and non-public behavior should take place.
Now, there have been several investigations that are currently underway. If the findings of these investigations are revealed at a later date, will this then still be implemented to those parliamentarians that are involved in these investigations?
Well, I don't know that we are targeting any individuals, but what one would like to see is that there's proper, effective, and fair law enforcement in Trinidad and Tobago. Whoever is involved, no person should be above the law, and the law should not be used as a convenience to persecute anybody.
Just let me come in here. The code of conduct is going forward, so it applies to all parliamentarians from here on in. Other appropriate legislation and other procedures will apply to people going backwards. But I also want to point out that every member of the government is automatically a member of parliament, whether you are an elected member through the House of Representatives or whether you are appointed member through the Senate. So automatically, this code of conduct will apply to every member of the government. But we need to design the code and implemented going forward. The people who may have transgressed in the past will be dealt with using existing procedures.
But you did mention the slow pace of investigations. That is a matter of concern to the national community. And it has been generating a certain amount of cynicism and loss of trust. And I think that is something that the government is not really in control of, because the agencies that investigate and prosecute are not really under the direct control of the government, and the population also wants to see that independence preserved. So it's a concern to us, while there are really impediments in the government intervening, unless, of course, there are obstacles in the way of the investigators that the government can remove to facilitate those investigations in general. But it's an area of concern that, if one reads the papers, one talks to the population, people are concerned that visible requirements for investigations seem not to be there. And even the smallest investigation has no end.
Good afternoon, Cindy Raghuba, WIN TV. Okay, of course, later this afternoon when our reports are made, the public will be looking at the manifesto as a gauge to, who they vote for come September 7th. And when they hear that there's an increase to NIS and pension, I'm sure they'll be looking for a figure. I don't know if you all have a number in mind in terms of that. First, in the presentation earlier, you spoke of, Mr. Imbert, to establish an appropriate set of minimum wage rates. Could you explain that a little bit? And sure. With regard to setting up the broadband services in these schools, you said not just laptops. I saw that in brackets. Is it that the broadband services will service the existing laptops, or is there a plan to maybe continue that, or set up some other form of laptops, maybe in the schools? Just a little bit on that. Thank you.
All right. Could you just remind me of the first question? It was, oh yes, the cap on. We have to review it. We can't give a figure now. Whereas we've looked at VAT very closely over the last couple of years, and we felt we can go with a figure of 12.5% in terms of increasing collections. We have to review the cap on NIS and old age pensions, and we're going to do that. If you look at the manifesto closely, we say that within the first year, we're going to review it and increase the cap. I wouldn't want to give a figure now. What was your second question?
Right. In the presentation, you spoke to establish an appropriate set of minimum wage rates.
Yes.
Could you explain
We felt the time has come. We must formalize this. We must formalize minimum wage rates based on the cost of living. And this is something we need to sit down with the tripartite system we're going to re-establish into this country. Sit down with business and labor and try and achieve consensus on an appropriate set of minimum wage rates based on the cost of living and the retail price index. So that's something we will develop in the tripartite discussions with business and labor within the first year to start to design and develop the minimum wage rates. And the third question was, why did I say not just laptops? Well, a laptop is useless if there's no internet capability, if there's no computer laboratory, and if the teachers are not trained in the use of laptops and internet technology generally, and the use of ICT in education. The laptops in themselves are just toys. So when you say not just laptops, you need to have access to the internet through broadband, you need to train the teachers, and you need to have computer laboratories. We have a controlled environment for education using ICT. That's what we mean by that.
So
more importantly, we need to integrate the laptops into the teaching exercises in the school to make sure that they are in fact a tool that is integrated into the system. The reports are showing us now that a large portion of them playing no part in the actual program, the teaching program. So these things we can look at and strengthen them as we go along.
I know you've cited the UE report on a number of occasions at your political meetings. Is there a plan of the PNM to continue or discontinue in terms of laptop to students?
We are going to use all technology available to us. we want to go beyond the supply of mere laptops. If you go to any modern school in the United States, not even a university, you go to a modern secondary school in the United States, you will see that a lot of teaching is now done using audiovisual techniques with a computer system in the classroom where the student plugs in their laptop and can interact in real time with the tutor. You can have video conferencing. You can have remote education. So when we say not just laptops, we're not just going to have laptops. We're going to have the complete suite of technological innovations to get maximum effectiveness out of these laptops.
You know, when I raised that, the findings of that report from UWI, I expected to hear from the government that they didn't know about it, but you know, you would review the system or we plan to do further studies and so on. But the reaction was to dismiss the finding and simply say, we're going to give more laptops to one other group and give more laptops to first-year students and give more laptops to primary school students. And I'm being advised that they're about to sign a contract to just buy more laptops. And the point we're making is that there has to be a purpose behind the expenditure. Providing the laptops as physical items are not in themselves an output. We need to ensure that they are playing a significant role as they are intended to. And it doesn't matter who's doing it, but it has to be properly done. And we would review it and build upon what is there.
Right.
Just to follow up on her second question, is it that you all are exploring the idea of what they call a living wage?
Yes, we have to have a partnership with all of the people who contribute to our economy. We have to sit down with business, we have to sit down with labor. It's done in Barbados, at least they try to do it in Barbados, where you have a consensus among all the actors, the public sector, the private sector, and labor, and try and come up with meaningful minimum wage standards. So we have to have dialogue, sorry.
And just to bring that to a little bit of focus, we have been approached by business asking us about our policy on importation of labor. And we don't think that that is a solution to our problem. We believe that we should first maximize the labor that is within our borders by making work attractive and meaningful, and people get a fair day's work, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. And if we focus on that, then the minimum wage and what is called the living wage would be the way to go and would save us from having to begin to think about abandoning persons within our border to minimum wage and sub-minimum wage state-funded payments and try to bring in external workers. So that whole conversation is there. And we are not partial at this time to talk about bringing in outsiders to work in Trinidad and Tobago while we have these issues which we believe we can solve in this way.
Mr. Rowley, Peter Richards, Caribbean Media Corporation, Barbados. I want to ask you 3 questions, basically looking at...
Let's do them one by one. It makes it easier for us.
Yeah, much easier.
I'll ask you one by one. First of all, on the question of the Caribbean Court of Justice, how soon, if the PNM is elected to office, would your government look to join the Caribbean Court of Justice in its entirety?
Well, that would depend entirely on what goes on in the Parliament. As I speak to you now, the PNM's position is well known and remains the same. We support the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court of appeal. But we cannot bring that about on our own. A certain majority is required in the Parliament. If the population votes the way we'd like them to vote and give us that majority, then we'll do it almost immediately. If, on the other hand, we have to persuade an opposition to vote with us, we will have to consult with the opposition, whoever that opposition is, and it's our view that whatever the situation, we are going to bring the bill to the Parliament and have a debate on it. We will put our pros forward, and hopefully the opposition will join us, and if not, they'll put the cons forward, And the population will see both sides of the argument, but there will be a parliamentary debate on this matter.
On the question of the Commonwealth Secretary General, there are two candidates. So Ron Sanders from Antigua and Barbuda, and Dame from, her name slips me now, but the Dominica candidate. Which of the two candidates would your government's support?
Well, in the opposition, we've been following this matter for quite a while, and we support Sir Ron Sanders of Antigua.
And finally, in the manifesto, it says, repair relationships in CARICOM that have been damaged over the last 5 years, such as the relationship with Jamaica. Could you be much more explicit? Could you just tell us what exactly?
Well, unfortunately, in the last 5 years, Trinidad and Tobago has ceded its leadership of CARICOM and has made some very unfortunate decisions, one of which was to not turn up in that meeting in Guyana, where the CSME was discussed in our absence, and the whole initiative of the CSME has been lost. And our Prime Minister, speaking for us, has made some very unfortunate statements which had the effect of annoying our CARICOM neighbors. And I don't think that aggravation has abated in any way. What Trinidad and Tobago has to do, not only out of our understanding of the regional imperatives, but out of our own self-interest, that a healthy CARICOM means a healthier Trinidad and Tobago. And we have a leadership role, and we have not acted as a leader in CARICOM. And we intend to assume that position and ensure that CARICOM remains a regional entity with international respect, and Trinidad and Tobago will not speak down to CARICOM leaders and promise them aid if they will trade with us and make disparaging statements and so on. We will take the lead, and more than that, we will seek to cooperate in a way we haven't cooperated before. I spoke about talking to the Barbadians, about cooperating with our energy expertise, talking to the Surinamese and the Guyanese, and working with them on these areas that we believe that we can do better. And the world is getting more and more complex. The financial economy, the human trafficking problems, the drug and crime problems, we need to work together. And Trinidad and Tobago in CARICOM, we assume a leadership role there.
Good morning, Karen Kozier-Phillip from CNews. I see you have a page dedicated to gender affairs. What is the PNM's policy or position on the rights of LGBTs, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders, the relaxing of laws on same-sex marriage, and also the decriminalization of marijuana?
Those matters are not addressed in the manifesto.
So that's it?
No, it's not something we want to deal with here today. Those are matters we'll have to address when we come into government. But they're not addressed in the manifesto.
And all of those matters, as fashionable as they are, they require a certain amount of discussion.
Exactly. We need to talk.
And we need to talk about these things a bit more before we jump to any conclusions on them. We're not making fashion statements on these matters. They're very sensitive issues, and the population has to be prepared to receive these discussions and take part in these discussions. And I can tell you now, they have not taken place within the party. And they will. I mean, at some time at the manifesto stage here in 2015, we can't report to you on them. But I'll tell you one final thing, is that it is the view of the PNM that all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago should enjoy the protection of the Constitution.
Good afternoon again. When the UNC came, when the partnership came into government, we're well aware that they canceled the OPVs, and they've went about bringing their own vehicles.
Sorry, they what?
The OPVs, when they canceled.
And what else did they do?
So I'm asking, if the PNM is elected into government, do they have plans to cancel some of the, like the personal armored vehicles that they're bringing in? Some have reached, some are still coming.
We are not in this cancelling business. I can say that now. The PNM had built up in this country a proud record of honoring contracts. Honoring contracts. We are not going to go and arbitrarily cancel contracts because of political differences. If contracts are inimical to the public interest and they're required to be reviewed, that's a different thing. But political spite and dotishness would not form part.
Let me just make a point.
The government has brought in a suite of...
Sorry.
The government has brought in a suite of equipment for the Coast Guard. We don't think they're the best equipment, but we've got them, we might have paid for them, and we have to make use of them. If over and above that we need additional capacity, well then we have to go that route. But we're not going to use a political response to our infrastructure and our resource base and our potential in shooting with these matters. That will not happen under the PNM. We have no such record, and we're not going to start now.
Let me just come in here. Recognizing that that is a genuine concern, that the PNM may behave like the UNC, and just go in there like a bull in a china shop and just mash up everything. If you look in that document, that manifesto document, you will see in the section on national security that we've actually said that we are not going to behave like them. We're going to review what's available, and we will use whatever military capability the UNC has put in that is effective and in the national interest. We've made a definite policy statement that we're not going to just go in there and scrap everything. It's in the document.
While we're on this subject, I just want to address this kind of conversation, because it's quite disappointing when we're in an election campaign and the Prime Minister is telling people that the PNM will take back the houses that they've allocated to people in their housing program. That is just absolute nonsense. They have done that to people. The PNM has no such thought and will do no such thing. No person to whom a house has been properly allocated need fear the loss of that item.
Okay, we have some time challenges. We have enough time for one more question before we wrap up. So could we get that last question, please?
Ria Rampoli, CNC3. One of the more contentious issues in the last general election was that of the property tax. Where in the PNM's manifesto is this addressed?
It's not in the document. This is one of the things we need to talk to people about.
Let me take that one. I'm glad you raised that. I heard a UNC minister, I think it was the famous Prakash Ramadar, telling people that the PNM will bring back the dreaded property tax. Let me make it abundantly clear. The property tax has already been dealt with. What this government did a few years ago, they returned to land and building taxes in phases. The first phase of bringing the tax back was to treat with commercial properties. The second phase was agricultural properties. And the third phase, which they very willingly, knowingly put beyond the next election, is the residential. So as I speak to you now, arrangements are already in place, put by this UNC administration, for land and building taxes for residential properties to come back into being after September 7th. That was done by Larry Hawaii when he became Minister of Finance. So for anybody in the government now to be telling the population that this PNM coming into office will bring back that tax is the highest level of dishonesty, which has been the hallmark of this UNC government. So I'm glad you raised it, so I make it abundantly clear. The tax for residential properties have already been put back in place to come into being in 2015, put there by the UNC government. 2016.
All right, Mr. Bagu, we'll allow you the final question.
Andre Bagu from Newsday. I was just wondering, does the PNM plan to renegotiate the contract to acquire 3 OPVs with Great Britain?
Renegotiate the contract?
No. That's
sold already? Those vessels are being disposed of?
The contract's been torn up, the vessel's been sold, the money has been received, there's no issue there.
The vessels are in Brazil, patrolling the territorial waters of Brazil. We can't renegotiate that.
The decision to scrap that contract has been heavily criticized by the PNM, and you mentioned how the borders have been left porous, and that's been a problem. So I was wondering if PNM administration would in fact seek to close that gap that you have identified.
What I just said is that the government has since subsequent to coming to the understanding that we do need offshore capacity, they've brought in, I think, 12 vessels of some kind.
Limited.
With some limited capacity. We now own those vessels if they've been paid for, and I believe they have been, or they are supposed to be. We will see what is now there and how much of our borders they can protect. And if we need additional capability, then we'll have to find it in whatever way we do. So there's no question of going back to the one that they canceled and getting rid of what they've done. We now have some capacity. If that is sufficient, well then so be it. If it is not, well then the new government will have to improve that. And finally, I want to say one thing before we get off the stage. The last time we had a manifesto presented by the PNM, it was torn up in public by people who did not agree that its contents was purposeful. I trust that this one would not be so treated, and this would be the work program for Trinidad and Tobago going forward for the next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that marks the end of this morning's event. I'd like to thank Dr. Rowley and, of course, Mr. Imbert for their very detailed contributions. We do have some refreshments available afterward. The members of the media are invited to take the opportunity to have this photo taken with the two gentlemen. Those of you who are interested in taking the picture, you're more than welcome to do so. And those who would prefer to eat, you can exit through the back doors, and there is refreshments on the corridor. Thank you.
Live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel, the People's National Movement 2015 Manifesto launch.